and welcome back to Hungry Talks, the show where we tackle Adlan's biggest questions.
Now, as an 8-time rewatcher of Mad Men, we know the stereotype. Advertising is a land of ad men. You know the whole boys club thing?
Which brings us to today's question. What's it like being a woman in advertising, and how has that changed since then? So later on, we'll be talking to Nomfundo Msomi, who's a decorated brand strategist, as well as a mentor for Assisterhood and a member of the Aunties. But before we get into that, Charlotte's abandoned us this week, so we're covering the news ourselves.
Don't worry, Charlotte. We'll try not to break anything. Starting us off this week, MNC Saatchi had their global earnings call yesterday and revealed that, and I'm quoting the CEO here, Australia was a particularly poor performer.
So that's right. In fact, that they said globally their revenue went down 9.5%, but if you exclude Australia, it only went down 2.5%.
In response, they've nabbed Ryan Mason from Clemenger to be their new managing partner. They say that she is, quote, one of the best in the business and her arrival is a statement of intent. Moving on, Cummins & Partners have just won the Snack Brands account.
I wonder what that might be.
It's snacks, actually. They own Kettles, CC, Cheezels and Thins, among others.
They said that they needed an agency that understood both the art and the science of snacking.
So when I ate a whole box of barbecue shapes in one sitting the other day, was that scientific or artistic?
No, it was gross. Anyway,
do you remember those Hubble ads from last year?
The Hamish and Andy ones?
Yeah, that's the ones. Well, they've decided that they're no longer going to be marketed. The Guardian the other day reported that they'd spent $70 million on marketing, so it's a really massive turnaround.
I mean, imagine if we had that much money to promote Hungry Talks. We might actually scrap 1,000 viewers.
I mean, do you know anyone with a Hubble?
No one. But moving on, Publicis have managed to become Aldi's global media manager.
They spend $900 million globally on media, so this is a huge get for them.
TikTok is back in the news this week as the US president is trying to secure a sale of the app to American investors.
This includes Michael Dell, Oracle and the Murdochs, who are all going to own a chunk of it by the looks of it.
So the Chinese government has signalled to the Trump administration that they're open to the sale, as this comes after a comprehensive Congress vote to ban TikTok unless it's sold to American investors. And lucky last, so Duolingo scores are officially coming to LinkedIn. So you're now proudly able to display your streaks to anyone who doesn't care to listen. Well, that's it from us for the news. Now, the advertising industry has often been depicted as a place full of men in smoky rooms. Bit of boys club.
To help counteract this in Australia, a group of high-up advertising women started the Aunties in 2021.
It's to help women throughout their career counter misogyny in the industry. They offer mentoring courses to help industry professionals find the best ways of supporting women and marginalised genders through their work.
Now that brings us on to our guest this evening, head educator at the Aunties, Nomfundo Msomi.
She's worked as a top-level strategist all over the world and has been both client and agency side as she's worked to bring up marginalised people throughout the fields of marketing and advertising. It's
a pleasure to welcome her up to the Hungry Talk set for the evening.
Alrighty, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So going off what we were saying before with the Aunties, can you tell us about that and how it works?
Yeah, so the Aunties was founded in the dark depths of the pandemic. It is a sleeves up support network for women and people of marginalized genders in the creative industries to support each other and fight misogyny. So it isn't just about mentoring. We, as you said, run workshops. We engage in really meaningful partnerships. We create training programs for people who are part of our program and people who are not. So importantly, we did something called Support Talk last year that was aimed at executives to help them understand issues of misogyny and how they can help fight gender-based violence in advertising and in the creative industries.
Oh, well, that's really incredible work, of course. And as well as the Assisterhood, how long have you been involved with that and how's that sort of different?
Yeah, so I would say if the Aunties is a sleeves up support network, Assisterhood is much more sort of focused on the professionals. So it is the leading mentorship program for creative professionals. And this is my second year as a mentor, and I'm really, really loving it. It's been running since 2018. It was founded out of a lack of these kinds of programs. Lynn Deep, the founder, looked around, I think it was on International Women's Day, and saw a table of cupcakes and said, this isn't good enough. Clearly, women and people who are underrepresented need more. So she worked really hard with a bunch of other folks to formalize a mentorship program, which is now spans across Australia and New Zealand and is going global.
Now, the Aunties talk a lot about allyship. So what's the best way for a male junior to help out in a situation like this?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that junior implies a lack of power, and I think for what we know about the advertising industry in Australia is that it skews very white, and we know that institutionally white men tend to have a lot more power than I think young men in particular think they do. So it's knowing that you actually do have power, and I'm not saying you're not going to get fired, so please don't quote me, but the repercussions are less than somebody who was marginalized speaking up. So use that little bit of power to say something. If you don't say something, people will feel like you're acquiescing or that you're okay with behaviors that are not okay and discriminatory.
Completely. And as well, sort of going back to Assisterhood and even the Aunties, like as a woman or just anyone who actually sort of needs their help, how does that work in terms of can you reach out to them, or what's the process there as someone who might need those services or support?
Great question. So they work a bit differently, the two programs. Assisterhood is an application-based program. The program is actually running right now. So applications, I don't want to again be misquoted. If you go to the website, dates will be up. There will be a program running in 2026, but you apply for it and you're assigned a mentor. And then you go through a mentorship for a couple of months, you meet. Generally, you tend to talk about things like pay. Those have come up in both of my mentorships. How to advance in your career, how to pivot out of your career. I've had the pleasure of seeing a mentee have a baby, and that had nothing to do with me. And then it was all her. And then sort of figure out what she's going to do next, or how she's going to think about things like parental leave and how to talk about that at work and how to advocate for herself. So that's an application-based program. The Aunties is a bit different. There are ongoing partnerships and ways to be involved. There is also a formal application process. So we're running different programs throughout the year. If you check out the Aunties on any socials or go to theaunties.com.au, you'll be able to get a little bit more information about what we're doing throughout the year.
For sure. Oh, well, thank you.
Now, you've been a high-up strategist for a very long time. So how do you, since we don't hear too much from strategists, what do you actually do on a day-by-day basis?
It's another great question because it's really changing a lot. So when I started out in the industry, that was 2011, I was fortunate enough to win what was then called advertising's golden ticket. So it was the WPP Fellowship. WPP is a global advertising conglomerate holding company, holdco, as you say in Australia, because you shorten everything, and I like it. And so you get 3 years and you get to work in 3 different agencies in 3 different disciplines of advertising. And so I got to work I actually got 4 because I'm special. So I got to work in New York, and I got to work in London, I got to work in Bangalore in India, and I got to work in Hong Kong, a place that really changed my life. So back in those days, you had a ton of time to ideate and to check out the landscape. So you get the brief, you understand the business problem, you try to fill in the gaps, you try to place the business problem within a context, and I would, sometimes that would go on for 2 to 3 weeks. You may even get to go on a retail safari, go sit in a cafe and what are people actually doing at Starbucks, and come back with insights or findings or observations that will help shape the process. These days, the material conditions of being a strategist have really changed. Those processes are much more truncated. Often you just got to come up with a hot take real quick about how you feel about an industry or a category or a brand. So I'm finding that strategists have a lot less time and have to do a lot more guessing really quickly about what they think the answer to the problem should be. Now, the upside is people are learning to work within those confines, and there's still a lot of really great strategy going on, but the time and the ruminating and the collaboration, I would say, has definitely changed and is probably not as great as it used to be when I started.
So do you feel like that's negatively impacting creative work, as it goes through the process, the kind of the cut maybe to time or to resources in that way is reducing the quality of creative work?
Yeah, that's an excellent link to the broader topic that we're discussing. I think the lack of time and those pressures for hot takes mean shortcuts, and shortcuts often mean leaning on stereotypes.
Yes.
And the less diverse your room is, the less diverse your team is, the more dangerous and pernicious those stereotypes can be, and then that behavior kind of perpetuating itself over and over where everyone generally agrees, doesn't really push back, means that the creative work really suffers, and what people see out in the world is not at all a reflection of what they think is real or appropriate.
Yeah, so we had this sort of question written down, and I suppose it's we've kind of almost answered it, but do you sort of feel like things are getting better or going backwards in terms of the sort of wider industry within gender and stereotypes and advertising?
Look, there is the data, and then there's the lived experience, and it's really funny hearing this from a strategist, but often those don't correlate and they're not in conversation with each other. So what we know is that there are more women executives, that we have more gender diversity in leadership. It is a pretty feminized industry, maybe more so at the bottom than at the top, if you choose to use that kind of ladder analogy. It is a lot more diverse too, more LGBTQI plus folks, more people of color working in junior positions, and that does taper off. So on paper, it's a relatively diverse industry. At the bottom, you've got women executives. In reality, I still think we're making a lot of the same kinds of ads that we've been making for a while. And one that I wanted to bring up kind of in our chat this evening was one that I've had a relationship with for 20 years. It is a 20-year-old campaign and platform called the Dove Campaign for Real Beauty. It's been running that long, and I first wrote a college paper about this campaign in 2004. So that would have been my first year in university. And it was in its first iteration, right, where you saw, a really beautifully crafted image of a woman, usually smiling, looking lovingly or dazingly up or at the camera, and you were presented with a binary as the consumer that was like, is this flawed? Is she flawed or is she flawless? So sort of point out that Dove was trying to fight a really rigid standard of beauty. And it is it is probably the most awarded campaign, contemporary campaign out there. It's won all of the accolades, if you believe that, awards are important. But it always has made me uncomfortable, and it made me uncomfortable then. And so it's interesting to see something live that long, that in 2004 I went, wait a minute, what's the deal with this?
What about that specifically makes you uncomfortable? Like, what's the nitty gritty that really gets you, I guess? This
is where I should have like a phenomenal answer. I've had 20 years to think about it. But I think that the Dove Campaign for Real Beauty does three things that are a bit insidious for me. One is it claims to fix a structural problem by displacing that structural problem and placing it in the laps of women to fix. So the lore goes that they, some strategists or planners or teams, creators, whoever it was at that time, this is a collaboration between Ogilvy Canada and Ogilvy in the UK, read a report that found that only 2% of women believe that they're beautiful, and presented those findings to Dove, came up with the Campaign for Real Beauty to make women go, actually, you are beautiful. Now, is being beautiful a virtue that we need to fix? Is that something necessary? I think that's debatable at this point.
And also to be beautiful and then to buy a product is also
to be beautiful and then to go off and buy a product to reinforce that beauty.
Are you familiar with the Dove whole body deodorant?
Yes.
I think yes.
Yes.
What's your feeling in terms of that?
Well,
in relation to this sort of idea that everything's beautiful and everyone is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really similar, and it kind of reminded me of an ad I think they did in 2011, which was for their affirming cream, right? And it was, again, a beautiful lineup of women in underwear of different sizes, but not terribly varying sizes and shapes and colors, and it was like, tested on real curves. And I think this is the dissonance for me that goes, okay, so it is real beauty, but we need to fix women. And I think, again, like the big thing for me is fixing the structural goes, why do 2% of women only feel beautiful if that's something we feel like is important? That the answer to that is society, and it isn't just about you as a woman looking in the mirror and changing your attitude. I think the second thing it does that I really don't love is that it frames the experience of being a woman as just really sad. It's so depressing. I mean, it's just, you got to be beautiful, girls, women, ladies. You don't feel beautiful, and it's bringing you down. And honestly, it's bringing society down. If you would just look in the mirror and realize what you are, being a woman rules. Like, there's lots of really great things about being a woman. Like, I don't know, some of us are funny. Like, some
Nick's
of us
having a good nod here.
You know what I mean? So a lot of us are really smart, and it's not just about the resilience. I think it's about the nuance, and it's just a very unnuanced campaign that I think people read nuance into unnecessarily.
I agree. I definitely agree. I think it's one of those ones that, like, also insinuating someone is a real woman when all women are tangibly real is a very particular way of wording something that I think is insidious. I don't like the assumption that a beautiful person is stupid, and I don't like the assumption that an ugly person isn't. Like,
I think that's spot on.
It's so bad. Yeah. It's so bad. Well, I'll let you launch into the next
one. I was going to say that we were talking about how from the bottom up things seem to be getting better, but where are some other spots where you feel like there's a lot of room for change within both the agency structure and in creative work?
How much time do we have? Well, I mean, I think a real focus is in the creative department. I think this is really the biggest place, or the most obvious place, where we've seen a lack of change. And it is not to say that those things shouldn't happen in other functions of advertising agencies. We just don't have a diverse enough creative scene at all. And I think that there's also a tendency, because a lot of creative leads, you know, they work really hard, they're elevated to where, I mean, arguably sometimes they're elevated to where they are, and then the measure of what is good, they become the receptor, or they become the, you know, reflection of whether something works or not. And again, if you have not been exposed to different points of view, and you've grown up in an industry that has leaned on stereotypes so much, you know, and has been so lazy in that way, like, how can we still look at a room or a team of people and see that lack of diversity and say, you are the ones who can tell us what looks good and what is creative?
For sure.
How? Yeah.
For sure.
So may I follow on from that? We're talking about stereotyping. How do you feel like stereotyping looks in 2025?
I mean, I think I might contradict myself here slightly in that I think it's less about, you know, going back to the industry of the 1960s, you mentioned Mad Men earlier. I think that we're seeing less super dangerous depictions of people of various genders and identities. I think it's more that we just are not interested in showing nuance. So I think the stereotyping actually happens in a sort of numbing or a sort of silence or a lack of recognition of how many different types of people that there are. And I think, again, it's because of how, you know, the creative teams themselves lack diversity and don't want to tell those stories or scratch that surface.
I think we were speaking a little bit before about how you're sort of doing strategy work freelance for overseas markets. What's the difference between creating sort of work across, you know, of course, Australia has its own ad regulations against stereotyping. Looking at the rest of the world, what sort of things do you sit with and have to sort of consider and also just notice about it as well?
Interesting. Well, maybe I'll go kind of region by region. What I find in the U.S. is actually, despite all of the challenges there and implications for things like free speech and creativity, that people are really open to talk about issues openly. You know, and there is a loudness to working in the U.S. where I think, even if you can't or don't have the power to do something about it, people are always talking about, you know, how can we make the work, how can we make sure the work doesn't do X, Y, or Z that's harmful? Those conversations are big and they're open. I've also worked in areas in the world that are quite homogenous, you know, and so you don't have like a ton of like maybe racial or ethnic diversity, and so it actually doesn't come up in the same way. Of course, it doesn't mean that there are other issues, so that's been really interesting. I've worked in Hong Kong for 7 years, and Hong Kong is a really amazing and interesting place, but as a Black woman, I sort of sat outside of some of the more dynamic issues that people were talking about around sort of representation. And then I think in Australia, we have a really dynamic and interesting country that is so beautiful and worthy of so much, worthy of us to shine light on all the things that make it really great. And I think that just doesn't make it into advertising agencies as often.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like I'm putting on a different hat depending on what market I'm working on. And I will say, enjoy the experience of being a little bit of an outsider, so it doesn't always feel so personal.
Yeah.
I think it feels really personal when I work for clients in the US. But I think we could be doing a lot more in Australia to have really open discussions about how we could show up, you know, differently and better as an industry.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you, that was sort of my next question, was, you know, Australia specifically, what's it like working in an environment, in strategy particularly, that's now sort of starting to separate out from, as you were saying before, more of a sort of mixed creative team?
Yeah. I mean, I might be really unflattering here and say that it's quite regressive. I think that we tend to be less collaborative, and there is that more traditional kind of passing of the baton, you know, so your account folks will go and grab the brief, and then they'll just make sure that they take out anything that's weird or like figure out a way to deliver that to the team. The strategist will then pick that up and try to find an insight, you know, Godspeed, and then turn that into a creative brief the team, and then the creative team sort of takes it, and then they go off to make the stuff, and you don't really see it again until it's time to write a can entry paper.
Yeah.
You know, and so there isn't that really interesting collaboration, which means you don't actually have that many fights even, you know. You're not having as many arguments and like disagreements that make the work really interesting. And I think the work suffers as a result. So that does not apply to every Australian agency. Obviously, you know that, and the audience knows that. I think there's some places that are clearly making such good work that it must be a product of collaboration. But I think it can be really frustrating for a lot of strategists in this market because it is still so traditional from a process point of view.
For sure, yeah. And this question's slightly unrelated to our gender one, but I think it's a little bit interesting just since we've got you here. AI and strategy, what's that look like? Because I know everybody's freaking out about, what's it called, creatives in AI. But for strategy, when it's so, not numerical, but you pull so much data and you have to pull something from that.
Yeah.
How's that feeling for you?
I think about this all the time.
Okay.
All the time. And I mentioned earlier that I have like an academic sort of project simmering in the background, and it's around AI and advertising and the ethics of AI and advertising. Yes, you're right. So much focus has been on the output, the creative asset. But a lot of people are using AI every day. And again, when you think about the time crunches that we were discussing earlier that have made the process so short and so hot takey, like it really is like you'd be really denying reality by saying that you're not using AI to generate insights. And so the more we see strategy as this baton, as this part of a process that's really functional, the more the machines win. What used to be so great was that you had the time, and that meant that if you were confronted with a question in the room, you would go, I've been reading about this for 3 weeks, and I actually do think that the watch industry is in trouble because smartphones seem to be rising. I know this because of X, Y, or Z. I've spent time immersed in it. And I think the danger is, and again, as a person who does use artificial intelligence in my own life and generative AI, is when you rely on it to think for you, and it isn't a part of the way that you inquire. And I think that's the real red flag. And I think strategists who have been, sort of succumbed to the functional are probably in the most danger. So it's an active conversation everyone's thinking about all the time. And I think that the inevitability of tech platforms is some people feel like they are inevitable and we should acquiesce, and other people feel like giving up is saying that things are inevitable. Why can't we find alternate ways to do our work? My view is these tools can be really helpful, but I think the better sort of strategist that you are, born, not raised, curious to a fault, interested in learning and wanting to share, then I think the tools really work for you and they don't essentially replace you.
Go.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for RMIT students, this week's Quick Brief asks you to convince parents of secondary school students that are pursuing to pursue a career in advertising through RMIT's advertising major that offers a rewarding and financially secure future for their children.
Okay, well, that's right. So we're yet to give this one a crack, but here is a stellar example from one of our very own art directors, Gemma Caton. I'm going to point towards this camera. All right, wonderful. And she did the award school ad standard briefs. Go. So
you can submit your scamps to quickbriefs@hungrytalks.com.au to be in the running for the 2025 Scamp Champ and be recognised in front of the advertising industry.
So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you very, very much for coming on. And tune in next week to hear all about networking and strategy.
See ya.
Is the light going to turn on? Oh my goodness. Are we still mic'd?